New people, you're just in time for our political segment. I know a lot of you are saying, politics, man. I don't hear no fucking politics. There's important shit going on. They count on you not wanting to hear about politics and not caring so they can bullshit you. They're fucked up laws. They put people in jail for a plant, for having plant matter on their person. But tonight in Pothead Punditry, episode 30, the political segment of our show, talk about something very important. You might not think it's important, but I know many of you heard of Joseph Kony and the Kony 2012 documentary. I've seen the video. A lot of people have seen the video. I'm going to tell you about it, with facts to back it up, why it is bullshit, and it is not what it seems. It is time to put the silliness aside and bring the real world to stoners everywhere. It's time for Pothead Punditry.
Our nation stands on the brink. Every day brings new federal encroachments that take our freedoms and strangle our will. There comes a time when the silliness must take a back seat to the serious issues of the day. The time is now. It's time to fight back and reclaim the freedom that is rightfully ours. It is time to discuss the serious issues of the day with Stoner Jesus's Pothead Punditry.
It is indeed Pothead Punditry episode 30. Welcome to everybody listening live on gashouseradio.com and other places. Those listening later on podcasts on stonerjesus.net or on iTunes, or listening later on YouTube, where we put these political segments so that you may share them with a wider audience. Tonight's topic, Kony 2012. You've all seen the heart-wrenching video of this monster, Joseph Kony, killing children and using them as cannon fodder in his army. Joseph Kony, by all accounts, is undoubtedly an evil person. But the forces behind Kony 2012 are evil in their own right. And they're much more powerful. From the Lou Rockwell blog, LouRockwell.com, it's the March 10th story. It says, thanks to landdestroyer.blogspot.com for spotting this excellent analysis, which comes from blackstarnews.com, of what appears the next phase in false flag interventionist propaganda, the use of so-called social media with heavy celebrity representation to push for a U.S. military goal under cover of a highly selective, reported humanitarian problem. While most of the criticism of the Invisible Children, the organization that made and sent viral the 2012 Kony 2012 video, centers on claims of salary-heavy expenditures or similar behind-the-point observations, real questions such as why the ties to the regime change organizations like movements.org and others are not being asked. For example, Chris Surrett, listed as Vice President of Business Operations, is not only affiliated with movements.org, but has also been a regular participant in the State Department-sponsored Alliances of Youth Movements Summit, which created movements.org. Surely the idea that the State Department is driving and funding NGOs, quote-unquote, that are whipping up public support for regime change and training the regime changers is pure conspiracy theory with no place on a respectable site like LouRockwell.com. Well, let's play a game. Have a quick look at the Wikipedia page for the Alliance of Youth Movements and count how many times you see names like Hillary Clinton, Condoleezza Rice, State Department, and Jared Cohen. Have a look at facts such as this. Quote, in March 2009, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced and endorsed the Second Alliance for Youth Movements Summit, held October 14th to 16th, 2009 in Mexico City. This summit explored the role of technology in mobilizing young people working to end violence throughout Latin America and around the world. Young delegates, described by Secretary Clinton as the vanguard of a rising generation of citizen activists, were joined by more than 15 private and public partners, including the world's leading technology companies. Together they launched discussions on how best to use the latest technological tools to catalyze change, build movements, and transform lives, which we saw on Twitter, of course, when Kony 2012 was trending for many days. Oh, the article continues, but it's Wikipedia, perhaps. But the facts are still verifiable. And there's a quote, a link to blogs.state.gov about the summit. What could all of this mean? The article continues. Is it possible that the U.S. military and foreign policy goals could be pushed through using humanitarian propaganda films produced by government-affiliated NGOs? To ask the question is to answer it, sadly, as this is the era of many such programs like NED, IRI, NDI, Freedom House, etc. But what do they want? What are they pushing? According to the excellent analysis linked above, nothing short of U.S. domination of Africa through the expanded presence of its AFRICOM and denial of Chinese access to the resource-rich continent. Much as the Sudan Darfur issue was much more about breaking off a U.S.-friendly microstate in the oil-rich South than humanitarianism, so too this seems to be much more about broadening the AFRICOM presence in Africa, this time to support a U.S.-friendly dictator who is Uganda's General Yoweri K. Museveni, and again to capture African resources. Here are the money paragraphs from the fascinating Black Star News editorial. The U.S. government and invisible children are using the brutal Joseph Kony as a boogeyman to justify the U.S. long-term plan which to impose AFRICOM on Africa. Since everyone knows about Kony's atrocities, who would object if the U.S. sends 100 U.S. advisors to help Uganda, after all? Brilliantly devious. Of course, it never stops at 100 advisors. This was the announced deployment. There were probably more U.S. troops in the region. Even before the deployment, some had already been training Museveni's soldiers, and more will come unannounced. AFRICOM, the ultimate objective, would allow the U.S. to be able to counter resource-hungry China by having boots on the ground near the oil-rich northern part of Uganda, South Sudan, Congo's region bordering Lake Albert, and the Central African Republic. The troops would also be near in case a decision is made to support regime change in Khartoum, Sudan. After all, the U.S. foreign policy reasoning is that since Sudan's President Omar Hassan al-Bashir and his defense minister have both been indicted by the International Criminal Court, few would shed tears for them. And it continues. This story is about it's from nilebowie.blogspot.com. More about the youth movement that promotes U.S. military presence in Central Africa. Basically, they have to have people get a movement going so they can invade Africa. Otherwise, what would they say? Why would they say they're invading Africa for? They can't just say, hey man, there's fucking oil. We need more oil. There's a lot of resources in Africa that we want and we don't want the Chinese to have. This article, Youth Movement Promotes U.S. Military Presence in Central Africa, says in part, Edward Bernays believed that society could not be trusted to make rational and informed decisions on their own, and that guiding public opinion was essential within a democratic society. Bernays founded the Council on Public Relations, and his 1928 book, Propaganda, cites the methodology used in the application of effective emotional communication. He discovered that such communication is capable of manipulating the unconscious in an effort to produce a desired effect, namely a capacity to manufacture mass social adherence in support of products, political candidates, and social movements. Nearly a century after his heyday, Bernays' methodology is apparent in almost every form of civic and consumer persuasion. The platform of social media is being used in unprecedented new ways. One such example is the new online documentary about the Lord's Resistance Army, an extremist rebel group operating in Central Africa. The documentary is unprecedented, not for its educational attributes, but for its capacity to use visual branding, merchandising, and highly potent emotional communication to influence the viewer to support U.S. military operations in resource-rich Central Africa under the pretext of capturing the Lord's Resistance Army's commander, Joseph Kony. The LRA was originally formed in 1987 in northwestern Uganda by members of the Akoli ethnic group who were historically exploited as forced laborers by the British colonialists and later relegated by the nation's dominant ethnic groups following independence. Together with the Holy Spirit movement, the LRA represented the armed wing of a resistance faction aiming to overthrow the government of current Ugandan president and staunch U.S. military ally Yoweri Museveni. The LRA was originally formed to combat ethnic marginalization, but soon became dominated by Joseph Kony, a self-proclaimed spiritual messenger of the Christian Holy Spirit. Kony utilized his messianic persona to lead a syncretic spiritual movement based on Akoli tribal beliefs and extremist Christian dogma. It is claimed that the LRA seeks to establish a theocratic state based on the Ten Commandments. However, its inner ideological mythology is largely unknown. In an effort to mobilize a large-scale armed resistance, the LRA routinely recruited child soldiers and forced them to commit heinous acts such as cannibalism and mutilation on others who resisted to join the rebel group during their extensive 25-year campaign. Kony 2012 is directed by Jason Russell and runs just 30 minutes. The video has received over 20 million views on YouTube. This was back on March 10th. It's got much more now. And its national support group on Facebook is said to gain 4,000 members each hour. The highly produced feature is narrated from the perspective of Russell and his attempt to explain the Lord's Resistance Army to his infant son, Gavin. The video features footage from Russell's trip to Uganda prior to 2006 when the LRA was still operating in the region, and introduces the viewers to Jacob, a Ugandan boy who was formerly recruited by the LRA as a child soldier. Russell presents various montages of ethnically diverse groups of students raising their fists in the air, sporting Kony t-shirts, and scenes of mass celebration in response to President Obama signing S-1067, Lord Resistance Army's Disarmament and Northern Uganda Recovery Act of 2009. The bill was passed, of course, with congressional approval and allows the U.S. to deploy military forces in Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, and South Sudan at the consent of those nations in pursuit of LRA rebels. The film further advocates the requirement of public support for U.S. military operations in the region through forms of street activism, encouraging viewers to purchase action kits $30 and posters $10, featuring images of Joseph Kony. Russell then targets specific celebrities and U.S. policymakers and pressures them to endorse the campaign against Kony. Perhaps most absurdly, Russell suggests that without mass public support from the American public, the U.S. will withdraw its military presence from the region. You all saw it on Twitter and on Facebook. This article, again, is on NileBowie, BOWIE.blogspot.com. There's a heavy detail and links who's really behind Invisible Children and what they have to gain by all this. According to Invisible Children's own LRA crisis tracker, not a single case of LRA activity has been reported in Uganda since 2006. The website records 98 deaths in the past year, with the vast majority taking place in the northeastern Bagandi region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a tri-border expanse-sharing territory with the aforementioned Central African Republic and South Sudan. There's the whereabouts of Joseph Kony, who everybody's looking for, are unknown. He was last seen in crossing between Sudan and CAR in 2010, according to unverified reports. U.S. military currently has 100 military officers training and overseeing the Ugandan military in anti-LRA operations. Despite the complete absence of LRA activity in Uganda, it becomes feasible that the U.S. may be planning further operations in the resource-rich DRC. Over 6 million Congolese nationals have been killed in war since 1996, largely with U.S. complicity. The regimes of Paul Kagame in Rwanda and Yoweri Museveni in Uganda have both received millions in military aid from the United States. Since the abhorrent failure of the 1993 U.S. intervention in Somalia, the U.S. has relied on the militaries of Rwanda, Uganda, and Ethiopia to carry out U.S. interests in proxy. Paul Kagame of Rwanda, of course, was given free rein by the U.S. to conduct military operations inside the DRC and the ongoing ethnic conflict in the region following the 1994 Rwandan genocide. For Uganda participation in the fight against Somalia's al-Shabaab, Museveni received $45 million in military aid. Speaking, of course, of Museveni, the guy, of course, that we've established that is supported by the U.S. and Western democracies. This is from blackstarnews.com, also from March 10th. Invisible Children's goals initially may have been to publicize the plight of children caught in Uganda's decades-long conflict. Lately, IC has been acting as apologist for General Yoweri K. Museveni's dictatorship and the U.S. goal to impose AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Military Command on Africa. IC has produced a brilliant film that's making the global rounds on Facebook. Of course, it talks about Joseph Kony and Jacob, and while giving the impression that Museveni's dictatorship and his brutal military, which was found liable for war crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo by the International Court of Justice, has nothing to do with the atrocities committed against children in Uganda. It also doesn't inform viewers that Museveni abducted thousands of child soldiers to win his insurgency in Uganda in 1986, launching the pattern of child soldier recruitment all over Africa. In other words, the United States supports the man who started child recruitment. And I asked on Twitter the other day, and it's not just, it's every president who's complicit. It's Obama, it's Bush, it's Clinton, it's Bush 41, it's Reagan, however far you want to go back. Every president is complicit on a much larger scale than people like Joseph Kony in the killing of children and other people, innocent people worldwide. I know it's not a popular opinion. You don't like it, fuck you. You can fuck off. This is what's going on. Continuing, in fact, with this article, Kony's insurgency against Museveni was launched later, meaning he too learned child soldier abductions from Museveni, who, of course, again, is the U.S.-backed monster. Look at the way Invisible Children exploits American children in the beginning of their documentary. They then transplant the audience to Uganda, where again they take advantage of Ugandan children who are victims of both LRA and the Ugandan government's army. The imagery are powerful. Dr. Joseph Goebbels and Lena Riefenstahl would have been proud of this cinematic coup by Invisible Children. If Invisible Children was in fact a serious organization that had not been co-opted by the Museveni regime and the U.S. foreign policy agenda, the organization would inform the world that General Museveni, who now has stolen 3 elections in a row in Uganda, is the first person who deserves to be arrested. But of course not, because he's our guy. You can kill and maim and destroy whoever you want as long as you got U.S. backing. The article continues, this Ugandan and East African nightmare gets a blank check from Washington simply because he has deployed Ugandan soldiers to Somalia at the behest of the United States. So democracy, human rights abuses, and genocide become minor nuisances as far as U.S. foreign policy goes and as far as Invisible Children cares. This is beyond hypocrisy. Those members of Invisible Children who may have supported this misguided project to send more U.S. troops to Africa because they were unwittingly deceived should do some serious soul-searching. Museveni does not care for the plight of children in Uganda's Akoli region. How else we have herded 2 million Akolis and concentration camps for 20 years, where according to the United Nations World Health Organization, more than 1,000 children, women, and men died of planned neglect and lack of medical facilities, lack of adequate food, dehydration, and lack of sanitation and toilet facilities. Does this sound like a person who cares about children? And again, it cannot be stressed enough that Museveni is the one we back, and we are the reason he is in power. So the blood of those children and women and men are on the hands of the U.S. federal government. Continuing with the article, his colleagues have denounced colis as backwards and as biological substances. General Museveni himself reveled in an interesting pathology as a first-class racist African when he told Atlantic Monthly magazine in September 1994, he said, "I have never blamed the whites for colonizing Africa. I have never blamed these whites for taking slaves. If you are stupid, you should be taken as a slave." End quote. Again, from the U.S.-backed Museveni. Ironically, or perhaps not, the general was even more embraced by Washington after those remarks. General Museveni has been a U.S. ally since the days of Ronald Reagan. So why does Invisible Children only go after Kony while leaving Museveni alone when in fact they are two sides of the same coin? You can answer that yourself. You know why. These young folks who run Invisible Children, the article continues, are extremely dangerous to the welfare of Ugandans and other Africans should they succeed in broadening U.S. military presence in Africa. The United States were truly interested purely in eliminating Kony. Why deploy now when Kony abandoned Uganda in 2006 when he was negotiating a peace deal that ultimately collapsed with Museveni? While Kony and his fighters were camped at Garamba in Congo as agreed upon during the peace negotiations, who was it that launched a military attack with planes and helicopters in December of 2008? It was General Museveni with U.S. assistance. The peace negotiations, which had been embraced by traditional and religious leaders in the Akoli region, collapsed. According to Jan Eglin at BlackStarNews.com, the former UN Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Museveni also wanted to pursue a military approach and even ridiculed his own attempts to negotiate peace. Immediately more killings ensued, this time in Congo. And since Museveni and Kony are two sides of the same coin, it's unclear who committed the atrocities in Garamba after the abortive attack. The article goes on to talk about the Invisible Children campaign has convinced some celebrities, including Rihanna and P. Diddy, to tweet their half-truth propaganda film. This is a way to have one-sided and impartial information become the dominant truth globally and drown out critical analysis. So the article continues. It's a rather long article. Did you get the point? Why go after Joseph Kony now? Why not go after Museveni? The answer is easy. Museveni is our dude, and Kony gives us an excuse to move into Central Africa and get the oil and other rich deposits. What do you know about that? Life, as they say, is indeed a circle. Few people want to tweet in or whatever about how about conspiracy theories or about how the government's really not out to get you. All you have to ask yourself, and I know a lot of you who listen are stoners, that's why I bring you this information. Why is weed illegal? Is that not harming people? Medical people? Aren't people dying currently because they can't get medical transplants at hospitals because they're medical marijuana patients? Are people being thrown in jail for a plant? Of course they are. The government doesn't give a fuck about you. They never have and they never will. I've said it once and many times, and I'll say it again. You are the resistance. Do whatever you can. We got social networks. We can do this shit. We want to be jump on a Kony bandwagon or what the fuck ever. Talk about your own shit. Fight for your own shit. You want weed legalized? Talk about it. Convince others to come to your position. It'll be legal soon. Trust me, the walls are crumbling every day. Stoner Jesus Show Live, podcast number 126. That was Pothead Punditry, episode 30. Maybe go down as one of the more controversial episodes. A lot of people